being evidence of fraud on a scale that would have impacted the outcome of the election. And I was becoming increasingly concerned that we were damaging his legacy.
What did the president say in response to what you just described?
He said something along the lines of, nobody will care about my legacy if I lose. So that won't matter. The only thing that matters is winning.
So that was maybe the only other time we've heard from Hope Hicks. It was some of her testimony before the January 6th Select Committee, telling some of the story of January 6th. It was also one of the moments of rupture for her role as one of the few people Donald Trump trusted completely. It may have been one of the last times they spoke. She said today, though, they spoke in 2022, so that's about 2 years ago. Now she's again, though, the consummate insider turned witness to nearly every Trump scandal, testifying, sitting just a few feet away from him in his first ever criminal trial. Joining our conversation is Sarah Matthews. She was White House Deputy Press Secretary during the Trump administration and overlapped a bit with Hope Hicks. Sarah, Hope Hicks, at the beginning of her testimony, before the, I think, really universally agreed upon damaging testimony to Donald Trump in terms of the crime that's under scrutiny here, as well as her own emotions that came out in a very rare and human moment for her, there was some pretty important testimony about how she didn't ever freelance, that Donald Trump was in charge of the message. Donald Trump, she said, was the best at it. He was in charge of who to respond to, what to say to them, and that she really just got reporters on the phone. Is that how the press operation worked during your time?
Yeah, I think certainly Donald Trump had a hands-on role when it came to his branding and what the message was coming out of the White House. And I think, too, really when we're talking about scandals that Donald Trump was dealing with, don't get me wrong, when I was working at the White House and we had some kind of like low-level policy statement that we were giving to a reporter, that wouldn't be necessarily something that we would raise to him. But when it came to more of the controversial or salacious stories, those were certainly things that we cleared with him. I can just remember during the time that I was at the White House, it was the last 7 months of the administration, when his niece's book dropped. And that was during that time. And we had to push back on some of the allegations that she made in that book. And we cleared all of those things by him. And so I believe that her testimony is true and factual, that he was very hands-on when it came to the press. We know that he consumes a large amount of media. He's very in tune with what people are saying about him. And so it's very believable that he would micromanage these kinds of statements coming from her during the 2016 campaign, because it tracks with the experience I had while working for him in 2020 at the White House.
One of the exhibits put before the jury today was her own email message after she receives the email from David Fahrenthold, and it has in her own words, deny, deny, deny. Was that the strategy? Was that the message from the top down of what you guys did with every press inquiry before you learned the facts of it?
Yeah, we would clear these kinds of things by the president and ask him about different allegations. And if he told us that, no, I didn't say that, no, that's not how it happened, then we had no other evidence usually to go off of other than his word. And so I can remember, for example, one example that, struck me during my time at the White House was when the Atlantic story dropped, where it was claimed that he said that fallen soldiers were suckers and losers. And at the time, we asked him if this was true, and he said that he did not make that statement. And, this was coming from anonymous sources. Now we know that John Kelly was one of those sources and has gone on record to say that he was witness to those comments from Trump. And so that was something that I pushed back on. But at the time, I was taking the former president at his word. And so I think that that's probably similarly what Hope was dealing with a lot during the 2016 campaign. Obviously, I wasn't part of that campaign, though, so I can't really speak to if deny, 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 even if they knew that they were lying, was how they operated. But that wasn't necessarily, I guess, how I operated as a communicator during my time at the White House.
Lying for Donald Trump is now central to his first criminal trial. What do you feel seeing all the incontrovertible evidence that all of the things that were said about Karen McDougal, for instance, were lies that he told Hope and others to tell?
Yeah, I mean, it's just obvious, though, that Donald Trump is a pathological liar. And so it's not surprising that he would tell his staff these things, and then they're serving him and working on his campaign. So they go and then spread these lies, whether they did so knowingly or unknowingly. And so I do have a little bit of sympathy for her in that case, if she was misled in a way. But I will say, too, that when you go to work for Donald Trump, I think everyone, including myself, was aware of the kind of man he was and his character. And you kind of sign up for that, knowing that, he did have his good moments and could be, a good boss in some ways. But for the most part, I think you knew what you were kind of signing up for in that role. For me personally, I decided to take the job at the White House because I believed in majority of the policies that we were pushing. And I think with the case of Hope specifically, this was someone who wasn't even in the political world. She kind of just got dragged into it, caught up in all of it. And so I think that, she had this personal connection to him and the family. And so I think that kind of led her into, be the spokesperson on the campaign then in 2016. And I don't know if there was necessarily, she knew full well what she was kind of getting into during that time, if that makes sense.
You have so much credibility now as someone who's come out and told the truth about what you saw in your time there. And I wrote down losers and suckers because I remember you telling me that story. For your admirers among my audience, which policies did you believe in so much that you'd go in and work for someone who was credibly accused of sexual misconduct by 19 women before Election Day 2016?
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. And I believed in a lot of the economic policies. I believed in a lot of the border and immigration policies. I thought that was something that we needed to be stronger on, and he was a strong voice for that. I didn't necessarily agree with all of the policies that he pursued, such as family separation, but that didn't happen during the time that I was at the White House. And I think, too, that I agreed a lot with the way that he kind of disrupted Washington in a way, that he kind of came in and wanted to shake things up because a lot of Americans, I think it resonated with them that the status quo wasn't working for them. And so Donald Trump was a disruptor in a way, for better or for worse. Obviously, I think that the end of his administration showed that maybe that wasn't the best case. But I think that a lot of Americans feel similarly to me, though, where they liked the policies of the Trump administration, but maybe didn't so much like the man. And I think, too, something really important to note, though, is that Donald Trump is no longer the candidate that he was in 2016, and he's no longer the same candidate he was in 2020. He has fundamentally changed for the worse, and in a sense that no other president in history has ever disrupted the peaceful transfer of power. He will not admit that he lost the 2020 election, despite there being no evidence. And so these are disqualifying things for me moving forward, that I could never support him again, even if I did like some of the policies that came out of the administration.